Prince King Goes to Outer Space, written by Gilgamesh, narrated by Casmeri. Prologue. In 1984, Ronald Reagan announced the Teacher in Space project, led by NASA. A teacher was elected to fly into space aboard a shuttle to teach students about physics in microgravity while broadcast on television. The first flight of the Teacher in Space project was scheduled for January 28, 1986. Millions of schoolchildren across the United States watched the launch live. Tragically, due to a design flaw in the O-rings of the rocket, the shuttle exploded 73 seconds after takeoff, leading to the deaths of all 7 people inside. Among the many schoolchildren watching the explosion live was a young Prince King, who was once interested in space, but was now horrified by the sight of the disaster. The Teacher in Space project was cancelled a few years later out of respect for those who lost their lives. I touch the future. I teach. Krista McAuliffe. Chapter 1. Exordium. 4 seconds were left on the clock. The opposing team was playing mercilessly. The ball was passed to Prince King, but he was far from the hoop. Players surrounded him, making him unable to pass to anybody else or make a shot from his position. He made a pivot and threw the ball behind him. He was deafened by the sound of the buzzer. The ball gracefully flew and fell through the hoop on the other side of the court without hitting the rim. He had made the 3-point buzzer beater that won the 1999 finals against the Spurs. Alfred Jones, Prince's mentor, applauded from the stands and wept a tear. Prince was entering his prime. He was already considered the greatest basketball player of his time, despite how early he was in his career. Since then, he had had many great moments, such as passing the ball to the other end of the court and running there to catch it himself, giving a rookie player a concussion with no physical contact just by dribbling so quickly, and being the first player to dunk whilst doing a gainer. Over the next 14 years, he was considered one of the greatest basketball players of all time. In 2013, he was tried in a court for a murder which he did not commit. He had to take a break from his career to fight this legal battle. During a Knicks game in New Jersey, he was a suspect in the killing of Aaron Watts. Although it was generally believed that a man named Jack was the killer, he was never officially proven to have committed the murder, as he died in an explosion shortly after with the detective who had proven his guiltiness. The Watts family was unsatisfied with this and instead wanted someone to face charges for the murder. As you can see, Prince's lawyer, Atticus Lynch, addressed to the courtroom, the necklace recovered from the Met Stadium that was used to strangle Aaron Watts does not fit on the neck of Mr. King. Hogwash, shouted Aaron Watts' widow, accusing Atticus of using a Chewbacca defense. Later, the jury concluded that Prince was not guilty of the murder. His legal battle, which had lasted nearly 2 years, was finally over. He could once again return to basketball. Although he was innocent, his reputation had been harmed by the court case. He had become a controversial figure and was hoping for some way to restore his public image. A few weeks after the trial had ended, he received a letter in the mail from the President of the United States of America. Dear Mr. King, as part of the Ballers in Space project, BISP, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration has been searching for basketball players to recruit on a space mission to play the first ever basketball game on the moon. We have elected you, among many other basketball players, to compete against each other in a test of physical agility to have the opportunity to go on this mission. We are seeking individuals who represent what our nation stands for: resilience, execute, grit, talent, tenacity, success, persistence, and determination. If you wish to participate, we expect to see you at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas this January 16th. This mission isn't only about exploration, but also inspiration. The rocket launch and basketball game will be broadcast on live television in many classrooms across the United States to inspire schoolchildren about the wonders of space and that no dream is out of reach. We hope to see you there and wish you the best of luck. President Barack Obama. Chapter 2. Genesis. Prince arrived at NASA's facility in Houston. He parked his very expensive car in the parking lot, where he saw many other expensive cars and knew that the other basketball players were there. When he entered the building, he was directed to go to a room where the rest of the basketball players sat as they all waited for directions. Prince looked around the room. There must have been over 100 other players there. A woman walked onto the stage in front of a microphone. "Only 6 of you will qualify to have the opportunity to go into the rocket and compete in a 3-on-3 lunar basketball game. You will all be put through a series of tests on health, agility, and strength. We can only send the strongest, bravest players into space. The tests include riding a centrifuge to simulate 7 Gs of force on your body, recording motion sickness in the neutral buoyancy pool, and a standard medical evaluation." All the basketball players started by taking a medical evaluation. Most passed, with Prince being in the top 5% of healthiest players there. Next, the players went to train in the neutral buoyancy pool, a simulation of microgravity. The training was nauseating for many players. Finally, the remaining players individually went on NASA's centrifuge, a machine that revolves very quickly to simulate the force of 7 Gs on your body, much like the force you would feel flying on a rocket into space. Prince was the only one who left the centrifuge without feeling lightheaded. NASA was very impressed by this. Prince was one of the strongest players in the NBA, as he could lift 3 times the weight of his own body. He had unnaturally good cardio health, which helped him stay conscious by having good blood flow, even despite extreme speeds and his height. The players were offered free housing in a hotel near the training facility. That night, Prince had trouble falling asleep. After trying for hours, he only got half an hour of sleep before waking up at dawn. He got out of his bed and went to the hotel lobby to get a cup of coffee. "Trouble falling asleep?" asked the receptionist. "Yeah," replied Prince. "Exciting day tomorrow. I'm a big fan," said the receptionist. "Do you think you qualified?" Prince thought for a moment. "I think I did. But I don't know who I'll be playing against." "What do you think you'll do after that? You've had a long career," asked the receptionist. "Haven't thought about it," replied Prince. "I ought to be getting back to my room. Wait, can I get an autograph?" asked the receptionist. "Sure," said Prince. The receptionist slid Prince a slip of paper. "What's your name?" "Irvin," replied the receptionist. "Irvin Johnson." Prince wrote his signature and gave back the paper. "Here you are, Mr. Johnson." Prince began to walk back to his room. "Oh, and one more thing." Prince turned around, but like magic, Johnson was gone. In the afternoon, it was announced which players had qualified to go to the moon. The qualifying players were split into 2 teams. Playing for the Titans were LeBron James, Stephen Curry, and Kobe Bryant. Playing for the Olympians were Prince King and 2 rookie players from the WNBA, Stephanie and Kobieta, so that their team would auto-balance because of Prince's absurdly high skill level. NASA offered all the players a ride to the launch site in Florida. President Barack Obama approached Prince. "I would like to invite you to fly with me privately to the launch site on Air Force One. The future doesn't belong to the faint-hearted. It belongs to the brave. The Challenger crew was pulling us into the future and will continue to follow them. Ronald Reagan." Chapter 3. Reascension. Obama and Prince sat across from each other on the Air Force One jet. "Mr. King, are you aware of what this mission means for America?" asked Obama. "Yes," replied Prince. "Exploration and inspiring schoolchildren." "Tens of millions are watching," said Obama. "You were very brave for going on this mission, especially with what happened to the first Challenger." "I still have nightmares about that day," said Prince. "I watched the explosion live when I was 7 years old. Some nights I dream of me being in the rocket, seeing warnings flash on the screens but not being able to do nothing about it. Then the rocket explodes and I wake up screaming and gasping for air." "When did you start having these nightmares?" asked Obama. Prince paused, then replied, I've had these dreams often since the disaster of '86. Last night I had the same dream, but I survived the explosion. And for several minutes I was falling while burning. And when I was about to land in the ocean, I woke up sweating. Obama, interested, asked, "What scares you, Prince King?" Prince sat with that question. "The trepidation of death holds no power over me. I'm afraid of letting others down, letting my team down." "We're nearly there," said Obama. "One brother to another. You've got this, both the fight and the game." Prince exited the private jet to a pretty chilly gust of wind. Once he turned around, he saw the rocket. A Brobdingnagian structure towered above him. It even made LeBron look short. Printed on the rocket was the flag of the United States. Facing Prince was text reading, "NASA, Challenger 2. NASA workers approached Prince. "The rocket will be ready for launch soon. We need to take you into the crew capsule." They took him up an elevator inside of the scaffold next to the rocket. Inside the capsule were the other players and a trained astronaut referee named Francis, waiting for the launch. Stephen Curry was spinning a basketball on his fingertips, while LeBron James and Kobe Bryant were talking to kill the time. Francis Gambino was smoking a cigarette, despite NASA telling everyone that smoking wasn't allowed inside the capsule. "T-10, said the voice on the speaker. 9, 8, 7. Prince started to feel real panic for the first time in a while. 6, 5, 4. He was now breathing heavily. 3, 2, 1, 0. Lift off. The roaring of the solid rocket boosters, SRBs, was palpable. Prince King couldn't help but visualize the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger he saw on the retro television in his first-grade classroom nearly 3 decades ago. "There's nothing to be afraid of, Prince," said Kobe. The rocket made it off the ground just fine. Back at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, panic arose as they saw flames appear from the bottom right SRB during launch. "Patrick, the temperature's the lowest we've ever had for a launch," shouted one of the flight controllers to a QA engineer. "Did you manage to run a quality check on the O-ring seals around the right SRB?" A man with wearing a bowler hat and black cloak turned against the rest of the room. "Yes," he muttered to himself while stroking his sharp moustache. "My evil plan is starting to come into action." Back inside the crew capsule, the terminals on the computer monitors turned yellow with warnings. Prince swiped the basketball from Steph's grip. "What do you think you're doing, son?" "Saving our lives. The O-rings are failing," said Prince. "That's impossible. You can't access the SRBs from here," shouted LeBron. "I don't plan to," replied Prince. He grabbed 2 pitons from his bag and cut the basketball open, extracting its rubber and leather. He put the materials in his backpack. He then opened the entrance door to the crew capsule and climbed out. Using the pitons, he pierced holes into the side of the rocket's exterior. He was now outside the rocket, exposed to the harsh winds crashing against his flesh like a strong current hoping to rip him away. The upwards force of the rocket made it feel as if he had 2 people clinging to his legs. He began his descent to the engine of the right SRB. Holding on was only getting harder as the rocket was accelerating. Prince reached a test valve connecting the right SRB to the external fuel tank. He twisted it clockwise, stopping the flow of fuel. Both boosters' ignitions stopped. The rocket was now decelerating. Prince had to act fast, as it wouldn't be long before the rocket began to fall. Below him was smoke from an exposed part of the SRB, which soon calmed. Prince could see the hole. It was no thicker than a marble. Using the leather from Steph's basketball, he plugged the gap. Above him were the O-rings, 38 feet in diameter surrounding the entire SRB, which urgently needed replacement. They were covered by circular steel casing. He needed to unclamp the case to expose the O-rings. As he circled the SRB to take off the clamps, it became terrifyingly easier to hold on. He slid the steel case upwards, exposing both rings. The O-rings had turned brittle from the extremely cold temperatures, similar to the outdoors on a November evening. He gently tapped them with his piton. They immediately shattered into dust. The rocket was now reaching its apex and was soon to fall. Using the rubber from Steph's basketball, he created rubber strings as a replacement. He closed the steel case and twisted the test fuel valve counterclockwise, reigniting the boosters. The rocket was falling slowly, but once again accelerated. Prince struck a piton into the side of the rocket and began to climb up. The upwards velocity of the rocket quickly got stronger, making it harder to climb as he continued. He was nearing the door to the capsule, but it became impossible to lift his own body. Trying to pull himself up any farther was a Sisyphean task. His vision began to tunnel into darkness, and he felt that he was being dragged away from consciousness. His arms yearned for him to release his grip. Just as he lost strength, Stephanie reached her hand from the door and grabbed the arm of Prince. She pulled upwards, and against all odds, Prince had made it safely back inside the capsule. Relief poured over the crew as the anticipation that something would explode faded away. A few moments later, the computer on the rocket connected to an audio call from NASA. "Challenger 2, this is Houston. Do you copy?" "Copy what?" asked Picheta. "Mr. King, outstanding work on repairing the O-rings mid-flight. The rocket was likely milliseconds away from destruction when you cut off the fuel. You saved the lives of everybody on board. We have recomputed the trajectory of the rocket. You are all very fortunate that we can correct the path to take you to the far side of the moon. There is an abundance of food and oxygen in the crew capsule, which you can take with you. But you will be about 590 kilometers away from the court. It will require several days of walking to get there." Stephanie did some quick mental math. "That's a marathon to walk every day for a full fortnight." "Yes," replied the capsule communicator. "It will be a long walk, but this is the most cost-efficient way to get you to the basketball court. Landing the rocket now will cost us millions. When Earth is occluded from the view by the moon, we will lose the ability to radio call each other. When you land, you must head in the direction you last saw Earth. Once Earth rises above the horizon of the moon, and you see any land with one of the many NASA radio stations proxied to Houston, we will once again be able to communicate. Remember, God is on your side, and he would not let anything bad happen to the voyagers of Challenger 2, especially not with Kirby aboard." "Thank you, Mr. Houston," replied Picheta. Chapter 4. Exodus. Many players aboard the ship practiced stretching their legs during the long intermission before landing. Francis pressed the contact button on the microphone. "Houston, this is Challenger 2. Can you hear us?" "Copy, this is Houston. Earth is barely visible. We're at the edge of the far side. We can't see nothing on the ground. It's like Jersey during an outage over here." "Can't see what on the ground?" The cackling of the static became stronger as the moon occluded the world. "Goodbye, Houston. Challenger 2 out," said Francis. The crew went from the capsule to the lunar lander, which detached from the rocket. Minutes later, the lunar lander gently landed itself like a dainty butterfly. When the crew got out of the lunar lander, they set up radio beacons. Using a battery-powered radio receiver, they could triangulate the location and distance of the rocket, acting as a compass. After packing all their food and backup oxygen tanks, they began their long walk. The ground was hard to see, as their only sources of light were the flashlights from their spacesuit helmets. The first few hours of the walk, there was no conversation, until Kobe broke the silence. "So, how did you get away with it?" Kobe asked Prince. "Get away with what?" Prince asked, flummoxed. Kobe looked at Prince with a sly expression. "You know, the murder." Prince felt offended by that question. "I got away with the murder by not committing the murder. I ain't no killer." The atmosphere became awkward and tense. Days passed. Legs ached. They had no way to keep track of the distance they had traveled, but from a digital clock they could know how long it had been since they landed. By the time it had been 10 days of walking, although the group had felt long exhausted, they saw a color other than the grays of the rocky terrain and blacks of the shadows. A pale blue glow began to rise from the end of the ground. The atmosphere of Earth became visible. This gave the group the hope necessary to tread farther. Picheta pressed the radio button on her helmet. "Austin?" "Houston," interrupted Kobe non-consensually. "Houston, this is Challenger 2. Can you hear us?" asked Picheta. "It's no use," said Stephanie. "All that land we see is ocean. We're going to have to wait for the Earth to rotate so we can have a direct line for radio waves to travel to NASA." The group kept marching forth. When hours later, they got a message from their radio helmet speakers. "Challenger 2 Voyagers, this is Houston. Do you copy?" The crew was filled with relief. "About time you talked to us again," Steph said sarcastically but excitedly. "The basketball court is less than 100 miles away. You can make it," said the communicator. With only 3 more days of the group walking, which was nothing they weren't used to at this point, they made it to the court. It had been just over 20 Earth days since they landed. Nearby, a rover sat, which had been landed on the moon a month earlier. The text on its case read, "Beagle 3 Revolution." It was an advanced robot built by NASA to construct the court before the players arrived, now waiting as a radio transmitter to send live footage of the basketball game back to Earth. Surrounding the court were spotlights, which created harsh shadows as they were the only sources of illumination. The basketball hoops were 60 feet above the ground, to compensate for the lower gravity, which would have made the standard hoop height very easy to reach. Resting in the center of the court was the ball, although it was nothing like any basketball the players were used to. Its outer shell used materials with less elasticity to reduce bounce, and inside was a tungsten core to add weight. The Red Bull logo was printed twice on opposite faces of the ball. Prince radioed NASA. "Houston, we're ready for tip-off." "I've failed over and over and over again in my life, and that is why I succeed." Michael Jordan. Chapter 5. Moonsketball. Referee Francis Gambino stood in the center of the court, holding the ball. "Moon basketball has some rules that are different from Earth basketball. Don't come crying to me if someone else isn't playing fairly. We're on lawless territory. You can knock each other's teeth out and whatnot, just get the ball in the hoop. Tip off in 10. Prince and LeBron locked eyes with the ball. They were about to play the fiercest game of basketball in the history of the sport. Tens of millions of people across the Americas, Europe, and Africa were watching live, along with millions of night owls in Asia. Every school in the United States, from the east to west coast, was watching. Even underfunded schools in the southern states like Mississippi and Alabama were viewing on CRT television sets. It was one of the most exciting days for sports, but one of the most devastating days for the global economy, as many people called in sick from work. It was an event with more viewers than any Super Bowl ever broadcast. Francis tossed the ball above. Prince and LeBron sprung upwards. LeBron hit the ball to his team, then Steph caught it and dribbled to the Olympians' hoop. Steph passed to Kobe, who made a successful shot. The first score was awarded to the Titans. Prince had to play especially well to compensate for his teammates. The Olympians had a few impressive moments. Prince managed to score 12 consecutive points for his team, but Kobe, with his unmatched precision, scored many three-point shots. For the rest of the quarter, the Titans scored the most points. When the timer ended, the score was 30-18. After a quick intermission, quarter 2 began. Prince intercepted the ball and attempted a three-point shot. However, the ball missed as he was not yet used to the moon's lower gravity, nor the lack of an atmosphere. Prince played most of the game with strong defense, trying to block Kobe whenever the ball was in his hands. Stephanie had swiped the ball from LeBron, who immediately after it had snatched by Picheta, who impressively was able to dunk on Steph. At the beginning of the next game, Stephanie had the ball, but Kobe then stole the ball from her non-consensually and made a half-court shot. The Titans played very jovially, but the Olympians were now on par with them. At the end of the second quarter, the Titans lead the Olympians 54-32. Although they had each earned 24 points, there was now a trend showing that the Olympians could make a comeback. The halftime show began. On Earth, an ad break played for all TV channels broadcasting the game. This was a crucial time for Prince to think about strategy. The physics of the moon was nothing like he was used to. How was it that Kobe was so consistently able to score three-point shots? Prince spun the ball on the tips of his fingers, but it fell off. Suddenly, it all made sense to him. Because there was no atmosphere on the moon, there was no air friction. The mass of the ball was tuned to make it weigh the same on the moon as a typical basketball weighed on Earth. The mass had no correlation on how quickly it fell, but it did affect the force he had to put into his throws. The third quarter began. With his newfound knowledge, Prince began with a streak of multiple consecutive three-point shots. Stephanie played strong defense, keeping Prince open to make the shots necessary to make a comeback. Prince had to put all his focus and agility into his quarter, but if he couldn't get the score closer to balance, then it would be nearly impossible to win. At the end of the third quarter, the score was nearly tied, at 67-64, with the Titans still in the lead. During the intermission, the Titans discussed with one another. They were aware of Prince's sudden increased accuracy and precision, and they strategized about how to counter his shots. And so began the final quarter of the game. All players of the Titans were cautious about letting the ball into the hands of Prince. With Prince's extraordinary ability to evade other players, he was able to keep scoring, though it became significantly more difficult with all three opponents targeting him. He had to rely on his less skilled teammates to score points. When only 6 seconds were remaining on the clock, the score was 87-83. Stephanie saw an opening and passed to Prince. Prince was inside the three-point line. Even if he had made the ball in from where he stood, the score would have been tied, and the match would have had to enter overtime. Prince sprung into the air, but as he did, Kobe jumped in front of where he stood. Prince's shot was blocked, but if he hadn't thrown the ball, then the game would surely be lost. So, using angular momentum, he pivoted his body. He hurled the ball in the opposite direction of the hoop as forcefully as he could. Just as the ball had left his grip, he was deafened by the sound of the buzzer from his spacesuit's inner speakers. Relief turned into anticipation when the Titans realized Prince's strategy. He was trying to score a three-point buzzer beater by having the ball suborbitally revolve around the moon and land in the hoop. Several minutes went by. When NASA eventually lost the ability to triangulate the position of the ball when it went around the far side of the moon. After some more hours had passed, the ball revolved to the near side, on track to land somewhere in close proximity to the court. The ball eventually came into sight. The Titans could not believe it. The ball gracefully landed in the hoop, without hitting the rim. Prince had just made the three-point suborbital buzzer beater that won the first ever basketball game on the moon. All over the world, viewers were in shock and disbelief. Francis looked over at Earth, feeling poignant, knowing that the crew would return to a planet that had forever been changed by the historical match that they had played. Could they even call it home, considering how different things were now? LeBron had no idea how to tell the orphaned Make-A-Wish kid he met that he wasn't able to win the game, despite promising to. The orphaned Make-A-Wish kid had no idea how to tell LeBron that he could now pay for the surgeries imperative to survive because he had gambled a large sum of money that Prince would win for the Olympians. Soon after, a lunar lander sent by NASA landed beside the basketball court to transport the crew onto a command module back home. Before entering the lunar lander, Prince reached into his backpack and grabbed a flag of the Knicks team logo, which he planted into the ground. The crew entered the lunar lander, which docked with the command module Odyssey 2, a vehicle which would carry the crew back to Earth. Chapter 6. Odyssey. The command module Odyssey 2 jettisoned from the lunar lander and was headed on a direct path toward the Atlantic Ocean. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" said Stephanie, looking down on Earth. "Long way down," replied Francis. The weight of the command module slowly became heavier as it got closer, until eventually the crew felt they were falling. The horizons quickly became shorter as they descended. Odyssey 2, this is Houston. You are in the thermosphere. You will be landing around 50 kilometers away from the east coast of the US in a few minutes. When the group reached the stratosphere, they heard a pretty large bang from the service module. One of the oxygen tanks exploded, destroying most of the service module, but thankfully leaving the people inside the cabin of the command module unharmed. The crew for the sudden forwards jolt, as the command module was now spiraling forwards towards land. "Houston, we've had a problem," said Francis. There was no response on the radio. In the storage compartment were parachutes for the crew. Without asking for consent first, Kobe grabbed a parachute and leapt out of the command module. LeBron, Steph, and Picheta soon followed. "There are only 2 remaining parachutes," cried Stephanie. "One of us must stay here." "Let it be me," said Francis. "No," shouted Prince. "My career is over. You cannot let yourself die this way." Stephanie took a parachute and jumped, leaving Prince and Francis to argue about who should be the person to stay for the crash. Francis became agitated at Prince's willingness to sacrifice himself. "I have no family to mourn for me if I'm gone. You've saved me already, Prince." "Back at the murder in Jersey, remember?" shouted Francis hoarsely. "Frankie Gambino?" asked Prince in shock. "I understand if you don't recognize me," said Francis. "My years of smoking have caught up with me and turned my face and voice ugly. A few months back, I was diagnosed with lung cancer, stage 3A. Even if I took the parachute, I'm already dead." Once the command module had stopped flying ballistically, Prince and Francis looked out the window in horror. They were falling towards Long Island. "I can steer out of the way, but you've got to leave now," shouted Francis. "If being in the Navy has taught me one thing, it's that the captain must always look out for his crew." Prince grabbed a parachute. "I'll never forget you, Frankie." "And I'll never forget you, Prince," said Francis. "And we must never forget Brian Peterson. I'll be with Allah soon." Prince leapt out of the command module. Just afar, Francis grabbed a Jersey Mike's hot Italian sub from his bag, which he began eating as his final meal, while steering away from Long Island. Using the limited control he had, he was able to redirect the crash to an empty field in Pennsylvania. Courage is resistance to fear, mastery of fear, not absence of fear. Mark Twain. Epilogue. All the basketball players safely parachuted to the ground. Picheta began dramatically kissing the dirt as if she hadn't been outdoors for years. A rescue team was dispatched at the site of the crash. They found Francis's charred body, and all the individual ingredients of his Jersey Mike sub spread hundreds of meters apart from each other. The command module was deformed from the impact, but the computer inside remained intact. NASA was about to recover all the data from the hard drive, which included an audio recording of the crew's full descent. The evil engineer from NASA wearing the bowler hat and cloak was arrested for intentionally engineering fatal flaws into the design of the rocket. His legal name was Dr. Victor Evil, but he went under the fake name of Mr. Nice. When interrogated by the police, he admitted it was his evil scheme all along. He was revealed that he had ties to the Ku Klux Klan and wanted to explode the rocket because African Americans made up a majority of the crew. He was not involved in the engineering of the command module Odyssey 2. A few days after, Prince received a letter in the mail from the White House. His presence was requested to meet with President Obama and receive the Presidential Medal of Freedom. After a long, calm, boring drive later, Prince arrived at the White House in Washington, D.C. He was directed to the East Room. There sat a crowd of the friends and family of the crew, along with the teams of the other basketball players, including the New York Knicks. The ceremony began with Obama on stage, summarizing the events of the Challenger 2 expedition. Each person on the mission was an honoree and was to be called up individually by an aide. Prince King announced the age. For your extraordinary courage, improvisation, and successfully shooting a 3-point buzzer beater, saving everyone on Challenger 2 and inspiring the next generation, The United States of America awards you with the Presidential Medal of Freedom." Prince stood and walked on stage to applause. Obama lifted the medal and placed it around Prince's neck, then gave him a firm handshake. One by one, every remaining honoree was called up. Finally, the last Presidential Medal of Freedom of the evening was awarded. Dr. Francis Gambino announced the aide, "For your selflessness, heroism, and willingness to die to save the lives of others, leading the expedition and bringing the passengers of the Command Module Odyssey 2 to safety, the United States of America posthumously awards you with the Presidential Medal of Freedom." Nobody was there to accept the medal on behalf of Francis. Prince announced his retirement from the NBA the following week. Shortly after, he founded the Alfred Jones Foundation, a non-profit organization to assist young people in achieving their dreams, just as Alfred had assisted Prince in becoming an athlete. After months of hard work, Prince was scheduled to open the Foundation Center in New York City. A crowd gathered at the opening ceremony. Many more viewed online. "Before I cut this ribbon, I would like to read a speech I have prepared," announced Prince to the crowd. "Some of you following my career may remember my memorial to Brian Peterson back in 2013. This is very similar." Prince grabbed a piece of paper from his pocket, outlining the speech he was about to give. On January 28th, the Challenger 2 rocket carried me, a group of other basketball players, and an astronaut referee into space. On February 24th, only me and the other basketball players made it back safely. The name of the man who died was Francis Gambino, and he chose to sacrifice himself so the rest of us could survive. When I was 7 years old, my first grade classroom watched the explosion of the Space Shuttle Challenger on live television. For nearly 30 years, I have had recurring nightmares of myself being on the shuttle. The night before launch, I had a similar dream. I dreamt I was in the crew capsule of the Challenger, as usual, when alarms suddenly started going off. Atypical to my previous dreams, the other people aboard were frantically yelling at me to fix the O-rings of the rocket. "Prince, you must do something," they shouted. I felt overwhelmed, unsure of what to do. That's when the rocket exploded. But the dream didn't end there. I dreamed that we were plummeting towards the ocean, while the rest of the crew was burning. It was only when I was about to land in the ocean that I awoke. I was afraid not of death, but of failure. Being on the Challenger 2 terrified me, but it reshaped who I was. During our return to Earth, an oxygen tank of the service module attached to our vehicle exploded. There were enough parachutes for all but one of us. Francis Gambino, our referee, insisted that he stayed while he steered the vehicle away from an urban area. People have called him fearless, but he was not fearless. None of us were. Watching the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster taught me to be fearful. Riding the Challenger 2 taught me to be brave. Among the many school children watching were the next explorers. They will be the people to colonize Mars and terraform Venus. They are the Leif Eriksons and Sir Francis Drakes of the future, and we must work tirelessly to make sure they stay curious and inspired. I am honored to open the Alfred Jones Foundation Center in memory of Alfred Jones, Krista McAuliffe, Brian Peterson, and Francis Gambino. Do not be fearless. Be brave. Thank you for listening. This has been Prince King Goes to Outer Space, written by Gilgamesh, narrated by Cass Mary. Copyright 2026, Gilgamesh. Narration copyright 2026, Cass Mary.